Good morning. Hi, I'm Sherry Prukas. I'm Director of Teaching and Learning with Technology for the Virginia 23 Community Colleges, as well as the Director of the Accessibility Compliance Initiative. With us, we have Paige Durham, who's our accessibility provider and all things knowledgeable about all things accessibility. And today we're going to focus on PowerPoint presentations. And like I did last time, we'll learn about what reading order really means. Because if you understand it, it ends up that it's easy. If you don't understand it, then you spend hours like I did trying to figure out. But it is my pleasure to bring you to Paige to talk to us about accessibility and all things PowerPoint. Paige, floor is yours.
All right. Well, good morning. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Um, so we're going to talk just about PowerPoint today, and how it can be a tool to provide additional visuals or presentations or things like that, but also making sure that it meets the accessibility guidelines that we all are aware of. So we're going to talk about color contrast, layout, reading order, alt text, and exporting to PDF. So why is this important? Well, we're working toward that goal of having our digital materials compliant by April 24th of 20 this year, not 2026 like that some other year, this current year. Now, many instructors like to use PowerPoints as lectures, and then they may want to give them to students as a PDF, which is fine. But we need to make sure that the PowerPoint itself is accessible before we ever worry about whether or not students can access it. Remember, the key is if you create it, then you are responsible for making it accessible. So these are the 8 essential elements that make PowerPoints accessible. So, by the way, if you have questions, please use the Q&A and not the chat. The chat is for Sherry and I to send you information, but the Q&A is for you to ask me questions during the presentation. Forgot to say that, but oh, and who am I? That's me. I, I used to work at Joanna. You probably seen me before. I was the chair of ELIT for a long time. I've done many presentations at New Horizons. I'll be doing 4 more this year as well, some of which are on accessibility, some of which will be on artificial intelligence. So now back to PowerPoint. So what it makes PowerPoint accessible? Slide titles. Most people don't think about that, and you don't have to necessarily make them as visually attractive. You just have to make sure that the slide has a title, and you can even hide it, and I'll show you how to do that. Reading order. What gets read first, second, and last is not based on what you see on the screen. Instead, it is based on how you built the slide. The next one is alt text, describing any images that you see for someone who can't see them. If the image is not important and it's just there for pretty, then you can make sure that you just mark it as decorative. Color contrast, making sure that the text meets that 4.5:1 ratio at minimum. Now, also, when I'm talking about this, we need to think about size of fonts. On a PowerPoint, we really don't want anything that is tiny. We don't want any 12 size font on a PowerPoint. We really want to think about starting with 18. So, and then for titles, we want even larger. Larger font on PowerPoints is always the best option. And what kind of fonts, while I'm on the font thing, any sans serif font. No pretty calligraphy, handwritten, hard to read fonts are good for PowerPoint or for anything for that matter. Descriptive links, never click here, download this, visit this site. None of those kind of hyperlinks. They all should be descriptive, describing where they're going or what they're downloading. Captioned media. If there is any kind of video, it either needs to have captions or there needs to be a linked transcript. And finally, how do you export it as a PDF that is accessible? So let's begin where we should, which is at the beginning. And so we're going to start right, templates and slide master. Foundation first. Don't start from a blank slide. So when you start from a blank, it creates an accessibility problem before you ever begin. Use built-in layouts. So that also helps with reading order. It also puts in proper hierarchy, and it also uses proper tested colors and fonts so that you don't have to worry about those things. The next piece is using a slide master. Is going to have the right font, or you can even create your own slide template. We're not saying that you can't use other templates, but you need to keep in mind some things when you're doing it. So, looking at the right side of this slide, you're going to see what you need to create as you're creating that slide master. Set titles to 24 to 32 point font. Use the body text at 18 point minimum. Apply color schemes, that have sufficient contrast. All new slides will inherit those settings, and now you're starting on a better way. So, oop, whoa, the wrong slide. All right, so um, I'm going to show you how to open a presentation and start with the slide master. So let me get to PowerPoint. Mm, You should now see PowerPoint. There we go. All right. So this obviously is a blank presentation. Now notice that I have some templates over here that I could start using and editing. That's perfectly acceptable, but we're going to start from nothing. So when I click on this, now I'm going to look at the design tab. And this is where you can see you have some options for themes. You can browse for themes, you can save the current theme, or you can apply a variant. You also, so before I begin that though, I'm going to go over here to review and I'm going to click on check accessibility. Obviously, it's going to tell me everything is fine, which is great. And now I'm going to click on the accessibility help. That's not what I wanted. Um, oh, file. Now I know where I'm going. File options. And I'm going to go to accessibility here. So this is where you can turn on the option to show accessibility status while you're working, and you can also show it for the status for each slide as you're building. So I would start here. I would also show screen tips, and so you can use those things as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK now that I've got that done. So I'm going to go back to design, and design suggestions again are going to bring up the uh, templates that you could use, or you can use the themes. So let's just pick a theme. I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to keep closing that. And now I'm going to right click, and here's where you can see some layouts. So I didn't start with a blank slide. I did start with a slide that has a title, and so that it is the appropriate, it has the slide title that is tagged as a title, and that's the piece that really truly matters, is that the slide title is tagged as a title. So you can see that there are other options here. So I have title and content, to content, and if you're looking at these, you can understand how these specific layouts are going to have the tags appropriately and help with your reading order. I'm going to go back to home. And now I'm going to click in this and I'm going to add a new slide. we'll do the second slide. So now that I have two slides, you can see I have the title, but now let's say I want to um, change the theme of this or edit the theme. Why is this not showing up? Oh, that's if I want to save the theme. That's not what I'm doing. All right, for whatever reason, it's gone. I'm not sure why. So we're going to keep on going. I have no idea where it went, but I'm going to click here. And now from the top, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to use the drop down for the fonts. And I'm going to change it to, I'm actually just going to type it in here because that's faster. And I'm going to leave it at that. And notice that the size of the font is 60. So I'm going to save that. And then I want to apply a high contrast theme. So if I click here again, and here's the title that has been saved. Now I want to go back to my themes and I can see over here that I have some colors. So if I look at some of these, you can see that this blue green here is not going to be high contrast. It's going to be, that's going to be very problematic. So you can customize the colors and you can create your own if that's what you want. But when you're doing that, make sure that you understand exactly what the colors are and how they look. So I don't know why that's came up with shape format, but we're good. So from here, you have some options to add in text boxes. Again, if you're going to add in a text box, you're going to make sure that it is what it needs to be. So now I'm going to go here and I'm going to click on this. And I see that the title has gone back to um, what it was. And now I'm going to change it. And I'm going to change this as well on the body and make that the right font. I'm going to leave it at, actually, I'm going to change this to 18. And now if I go back to my design and I use my drop down, I can save this theme with these changes that I've made so that when I come back here, I can have this, I can call this my accessibility template. And then I know that it is right. And I know that when I'm using it, it will be, it will have the current uh, fonts and sizes applied to whatever I choose to make. All right. So once you set this up this way, then you can make sure that you have gotten it the right way. So in this view panel or tab, I should say, here is where you can look at the slide master. So if I want to edit the master slide style, I click in here and then I can change the color. I can also change the font. So I'm going to tell it to use this font style. And I can also make sure that I can rename it. I can also, now I will say that when I click on each of these, it's going to, it noticed that once I did it on the first slide, it applied it to all the following slides. So I don't have to do it for every single slide in this when I'm doing it. I also want to set the body of the text to 18 font. So I need to make sure that, yeah, it is the right font. Now I need to make sure that it's the right size. So I'm going to go here and make it 18. And then of course I'd have to change all of these as well. That'd be 16 and so on. So you can see how you would, I would delete these myself And now I have created my own slide. Now, what I would want to do before I move away from this is I want to rename this, and I probably want to call it, uh, except I can't spell, and then we can rename it. So then I can close the master slide view, and now I have that saved as a theme. All right, so in the view tab is where you're going to find your slide master and how you can uh, make the master slide have the appropriate, and that way it applies to all the following slides without having to do each individual slide. So once we've done that, um, every title, every slide needs a unique title. So let's go back. There we go. All right. So avoid things like uh, repeating the same title or introduction or overview or slide 3. You want to make sure that your title is descriptive. So if you need to have it a duplicate slide with the same title, you need to make something in that title unique. For example, you can add a V1, a V2, a P1, a dot one, anything that changes the title. Because if someone were to listen to the slides and they wanted to go back to one of your, let's say you had 3 overview slides and they don't know which overview, they're now going to have to listen to all 3 slides to get to that information that they wanted in one slide. So what they're doing is they're using that as a place and a way to navigate through your PowerPoint. So you can also drag a title off the slide to the top is the best. Um, and then, or you can make the title match the background, and then no one will see it. So it's invisible. So I'm going to pull up. Um, so let's look at this, and we're going to talk about fixing missing and duplicate titles. So I have a PowerPoint that I created, and I'm going to come here, and I'm going to go ahead, and for the purpose of this, I'm going to pick review, and I'm going to choose to check accessibility. Now, you can see that there's a lot of things going on here, but we're going to slide down here to the missing slide title. So there's no slide title on this. Now, you can see that that looks like a slide title, but it isn't. So what I can do now is simply click the button that says to resolve, set as slide title, and then I can approve it. Now, this also doesn't have a slide title. So it's thinking that this is the slide title. Well, that's not the slide title. So if I click back up at the top and now I'm on the overview, I can set that as the slide title. I'm going to approve that. Now, here's the example of a second slide with the same title as the first. So I don't really want this to show it all. So I'm going to drag it up above the box. And now I'm going to actually put in here a dot one. Well, now you can't see that. But what it says, and I'll highlight it so you can see it, it says overview dot one. So I hid that slide title, and now I don't have to worry about someone not understanding that there are 2 overview slides, and the second overview slide talks about who we serve. So I can delete this, and now I can approve this, and now I can move on. So again, you can see that it's pretty easy how to fix that. So if you want to show all of the slide titles, if I go to view and I go to Katie, can you please put your question in the chat? I mean, in the Q&A. I'm going to now go to the outline view, And you can see that slides 4, 5, 6, and 7 don't have a title. So that's a quick way for you to review your slides and see whether or not they have slide titles. So if I approve these, you can see that they show up. Um, and I have to sometimes change where the slide title is and approve. So now I have fixed all of the slide titles, and I went to view and outline in order to see exactly what the slide titles are.
Paige, we need you to back up for 1 minute. Somebody missed how you opened up the accessibility assistant.
Oh, okay, got it. I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to close this. All right, so I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to go back to the first slide. Now, so I've already fixed my slide titles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to review. That's in the top tab at the very top. Then check accessibility. And I'm assuming this is what you wanted me to show.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. So the issue here is normally I would choose to view show only issues on current slide, and I would toggle the switch on. Okay. But because I was doing slide titles, I left this off, and then I went down here to missing slide title. And then I went through and looked at the things. This slide, I specifically put a slide title as a hidden slide title. Again, I could change the color so that you can see it. And now you can see that this is above the slide. So when I am in presentation mode, that title is not going to show at all. And there are definite times when you need to hide slide titles. It just depends on what you're doing. So I went through how to put in a title that wasn't there. I also went in and showed you how to fix a duplicate problem and hide the slide title. I showed you how to view. Again, I'm going to click on view and I'm going to go to outline so that you can see what the slide titles are. The slide titles, again, you can see exactly what they are here on the left. And then I can just go back to the normal view when I want to get rid of that. All right, so that is slide titles. So now let's go on to the next big topic that generally gets a lot of people in caught in some accessibility checks. So that is reading order. What gets read first, second, and last. So reading order is the sequence a screen reader announces what's on the slide. The problem is that moving the elements around does not change the order. So the default order is title, content, placeholders, text boxes, images. But if that's not how you want the slide to be read, then you have to fix the issues. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So there are going to be multiple text boxes and an image. I'm going to show you the incorrect reading order, and then I'm going to show you how to fix that. Okay, so here we are back in, so I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to start this process again. So let's just say this is the first time. So I'm going to come up here to review. I'm going to click check accessibility. Now this time I actually am going to turn on the show only issues with current slide. And from here, I'm going to click on check reading order and now check object reading order. And so this is what would be read. So it's going to read who we serve, office over 8400, source, blah, 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 picture, over title. So you can see that that's very problematic. That's not how we want this slide to be read at all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the carets. I'm going to click on the object, and now I'm going to use object not on the slide, but over in the panel on the right. And I'm going to use the carrots to move that to the top. So now I have the overview is going to be read first, who we serve next, the bulleted list next. Now I'm going to move the source to the very last thing, and I'm going to leave the picture as one before it. Now there's still an issue with the picture, but we're going to, for now, we're just going to leave it like it is. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute when I want to do the alt text. But now I have checked the reading order. So now I could go back, I could click on the next slide, and I can check this reading order. So the first thing, the shape here I have is nothing. That's totally decorative. So I'm just going to uncheck that box. Now the next one is the title. That's correct. Program description. Yep. 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 Shape 6 again is a shape, so it's decorative. I'm going to mark that as decorative. And now that slide is correct. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm walking through and I'm clicking not on the slide, but I'm actually clicking in the reading order panel on the right. Because if you do this, then that allows you to see exactly what is being read and if, or if not, if it's not in the right order. Now, this one has a lot of things. So, the first thing I'm going to start with, yep, that's a slide for sure. That's definitely the title. I don't need the shape. I do want that. I do want that. This is a shape again. Don't need that. Again, a shape I don't need. Don't need that. Don't need this. So notice that I am removing all of the things that are marked as a shape because I don't need anyone to know about those shapes. Um, and finally, this is the last slide. Oh, I skipped one. I could just remove all the shapes, but I want to make sure that I am not missing anything. And that's supposed to be a QR code. That doesn't look like one, but that's all right. So now I have fixed all of the issues. So again, if I go back up here and notice that I have a shape, I have that horizontal line that is very problematic, and that's why it needs to be fixed. So now I have gone through and I've checked every single slide for reading order. Now, if I want to go back and click review again, I'm going to turn this off. And now, if you notice, I still have one slide that I have not checked, and that's this one. So this again is the shape is the problem. So we have this overview. I'm going to actually reverse this and we'll leave that as it is. So now I have checked every single slide for reading order and it should be, and as you notice now the check is there and it has been fixed. So now we can move on to the next thing, which is going to be alt text. So when we are looking at alt text and thinking about writing alt text, we want to think about Acorn. Now, I also did something on purpose on the slide that you can see that the Acorn piece is almost invisible on top of the blue. So what I can do is, again, that's a contrast, and because this is a presentation, I can change the color and make it so that each of these is now a darker color. And when I did that, notice how quickly the words popped out. So this is what the Acorn method is. So we have accurate, concise, objective, relevant, and necessary. So now you can see that if I use those things, I can write the appropriate alt text for those images. If an images, as you saw with the shapes and the horizontal line, are purely for decoration, then we want to make sure that we mark it as decorative so that the screen reader skips it. We don't want somebody to hear rectangle, blue, and then the information in the rectangle. That is not important, and so we want to make sure that we skip it. So, what does good alt text look like? Good alt text looks exactly like you think it does on the right. Bar chart showing VCCS enrollment by semester, blah, blah, blah. Two students in a library viewing notes. You can see that it is very specific, but it gives the user, the listener, the information that they need in order to understand the image in relation to the text or provide them with information that they wouldn't get any other way, which, for example, would be how you would write out a chart. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. And we're going to begin with the first image. So I'm going to turn back on the current slide issue, and I'm going to go ahead and click on missing alt text. Now, because you have PowerPoint and it is attached to the free version of Copilot, you can use generative AI to generate a description. If I click on this, um, let's see, what do we have? Diverse group of college students walking in tree-lined campus during fall. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's actually pretty good. I would probably approve this as it is. And now if I wanted to edit this, I could right click on the image, view the alt text, and now I can remove the a photo part because that really is not necessary. A diverse group of colleges. Um, and that I probably would also remove that piece. So, and then now we have appropriate alt text. So I move to the next one. There's no problem here. I move to the next one. There's a problem. So here we have another image that does not have alt text. I can again ask it to generate for me, or I could take the image, put it in AI, and have it write the alt text. But let's move down to the charts because these are problematic. So when I look at that chart, it doesn't have alt text, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to table layout and I'm going to, I hate that it moves things. Uh, why? Hold on one second. So in Word, you find the alt text for a table in table layout. So I'm not sure why they moved it, but I'm looking for properties and I don't see it. Am I blind? Okay, technically speaking, you should have a properties option that would allow you to put in a title for the table. And that would be your, that could be your entire information in the table. But obviously it's not going to let me do that today. So we're going to move on. So here we have just the chart, but I need to put alt text for this chart. So let's This is, I'm going to use my snipping tool. And I'm going to just copy this little piece here. And now I'm going to go to Gemini. I'm going to paste in that snip that I just did. And please provide me with alt text for this chart. So this is what I'm choosing to keep. And now I would copy that. And now I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. And I'm going to go ahead and in the box over here on the right, I'm going to put that alt text in. Now the formatting is a little wonky, but you can just kind of remove the spaces and that's fine. And now I have my information for my chart contained as alt text. So as you can see, that was pretty easy. Not a big problem as far as doing those things. So when you are, if I go back to my review tab, let's make sure we've gotten everything. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off for just a second. I still have something that's missing alt text, and it's the QR code here. So I would just mark that as decorative. And now we have made all of those checks um, and fixed all of those things.
So
Then
Susan is asking a question about do you know how like in Word and other things we designate something as a heading?
Mhm,
Heading one, heading two, heading three. Do we
mhm.
do any of that for titles? Do we tag it as a heading?
No, you tag it as a title. So
And
what
and so there aren't really headings within PowerPoint.
So if I go back to, so for example, if you look here, you notice that I don't really have a style option, which is where you would find the headings. The biggest issue is putting in text that is the right size because your slide layouts are going to provide your structure for your tags. So it's the slide layouts that actually are what, and again, you notice if I click on theme styles, I don't get the styles that you would get as in if you saw a heading one, heading two, and things like that. So in here, if you needed to put in, you don't have to worry about headings for slides because they shouldn't contain that much text. That's why you don't see that. Remember that we're not going for death by PowerPoint. That text slides should be visual and contain information, and the majority of the information is probably going to be given as verbal information, as in a presentation or as in a lecture. So, does that answer your question? I think.
I think so, but she'll ask again if we didn't
Okay.
if we weren't.
Okay. So, um, so the text must be readable. Now we have to go back and take a look at a color contrast because that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. So if we're looking, if anything that is normal text, under 18 point is 4.5. Large text is 3 to 1. And any kind of UI component or graphical elements is also 3 to 1. That 3 to 1 ratio is what you're looking for. Yellow text on white, light gray on white, and obviously you saw light blue on blue was also bad. Red on green is invisible to colorblind users. And never use color as the only way to convey meaning. And instead of items in red, say items marked with an asterisk and highlighted in red. That would be a way. Now you can also check your color contrast with your WebAIM um, contrast checker. Ooh, where'd it go? All right. So I'm going to open my PowerPoint again and go back. Now, if while you're looking at this, you see that um, hard to read text is marked as okay. The only thing that's currently I'm going to leave that for a minute is the missing table header. But let's go back and take a look at this last slide. So for example, I want to go ahead and click on accessibility and I'm looking for inspect without color. So if I remove the color, so someone who is red-green colorblind, now I can make sure that all of the text that is on the screen is viewable to someone who may be red-green colorblind. Now that might not be something that you need to check for, but you can. Now, I also want to say that this blue on blue is very difficult. So what I can do is I can highlight this text. Well, I said that I can. And I can change the font color. And if I want to, I can turn on, well, it's not letting me, but you could turn on high contrast color only so that that's all that shows up. So if I go back to the home tab, it should let, why is it not letting me do it? Non-transparent colors. All right, so I'm going to see if I can turn it on here. Nope, not going to let me turn it on. Interesting. So we can change the color, and I can do this without having to hide the color contrast on. So I'm taking a look, and I either want to make it much darker or white because the color that it currently is, which was that light blue, was very difficult to see. Again, the same thing with this. I don't know why it's being so hateful. I can change that to a totally different blue. I can look and make sure that it's a bluer blue. That's purple. There we go. We'll work on that. All right, that's actually worse. But if I wanted to, again, you can see how you can change the colors. It just depends on what it is you're looking at. So I think this yellow is also problematic. I would not choose this at all. Now, um, if I weren't in this specific version, you should be able to turn on high contrast color only, and then it will allow you to change the color. So as I'm looking at this, I can see that I want to make this a darker yellow, and then why did it not change it? There we go. And then that's a little better, but I still don't, I wouldn't make it yellow at all. I honestly would probably make it almost a brown. Now that is much easier to read, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that high color contrast. Now, your PowerPoint is not going to tell you whether or not your colors are the appropriate ratio. So the tool that I was talking about is the WebAIM Color Contrast Checker. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this website so that you can see. So here we are this is the WebAIM Color Contrast Checker. Now, if I wanted to find, for example, that blue on blue that I had earlier that had the click here for appointment, I'm going to get the hex code for that. Oh, I didn't do that. That was not what I wanted. And I can put this in here, and then I can click enter. Now, it's telling me that it passes because it's on white, but we know that the background of our PowerPoint was not white. It was blue. So what I can do is I can get the color blue for the background. We're going to do it the easy way here. So we're going to go here to blue, pick a blue. And now you can see that we fail at all levels. So what I could do is I could then take a look here. I could decide what color, and now we're passing. So and then I can take this code right here, and I can go back to PowerPoint. Now, so as you can see, this is almost invisible. And so now I'm going to highlight this. I will click on more colors, I'm actually going to paste in that code that I got from WebAIM. And now you can see that's actually doesn't pass, but I wanted to show you how to get the hex code and put it in. So if you aren't sure, there is an in here, let's highlight something else. Let's pick a different color. Let's do this blue. So if I highlight the blue and I click on the down arrow, I can click on more colors and then custom. Now, when I get to custom, it's going to, this is where you're finding the hex code. So if I wanted to see it as the color that it is, uh, you can see that I can move things around. I can pick a different color. But what I'm trying to do is if I get the eyedropper and I click on the color, now I can see the color. And if I go back here, now here's the hex code. So I use the eyedropper tool to pick the color. Then this is the hex code. Then I could take it over to WebAIM and contrast checker and check it. That's a lot of steps. I understand, but I wanted to show you how to do that if you needed to. So we have just a little bit of time left, and I want to make sure that I get to fonts, links, and tables. So let's take a look at that. So if I go back and I'm looking at fonts. We've already talked about how to pick a font. These are some choices that you can use. Body text 18, titles 24, avoid all caps. If you have teenagers anyway, you know that means you're yelling at somebody, so all caps. You want to make sure that any of your links are descriptive. They shouldn't say things like what we saw in my sample presentation was click here for whatever it said to book an appointment. That's not bad, but it's not great either. To book an appointment, follow this link, opens in a new tab, might be a better description. And tables, make sure that your table has a header row, avoid merge cells, and keep the structure specifically in PowerPoint very simple. So now let's go back to PowerPoint and take a look at the one table that we had. And we already know that it's missing a table header. So if I click on the table, as soon as I click on it, I have two other tabs that now open at the top, and that's table design. The one I'm going to choose right now is the header row. So now I have marked that the service, students served, and satisfaction rates are the kind of key to the table. So the screen reader would read service, resume review, students served 312, satisfaction rate 94%, service, mock interview, students served 187, satisfaction rate 97. So it's going to read that header every single time. Now, if you happen to have a table that needs to have the first column and the first header, then you're going to choose both of those. You're going to make sure that you choose however many things that you need. Total row, last column, banded rows, banded columns. That's more for design elements. But the two key pieces are the header row and the first column. Now, your table layout, if I ever get there, is really just about how it looks, the text direction. So whether it's reading it straight, whether the text is going straight across or up and down. Screen readers, that doesn't matter as long as you have marked your header or column rows appropriately. So that's kind of what you see there. So when you
This somewhat fits in, Paige. When you really want to stress visually the importance of something, what do you do besides all caps?
uh, if you want to stress the importance of something, you want it emphasized,
Yeah.
then you might want to put in parentheses either at the beginning or the end, important, or you can make it bold text. Bold text would be fine. And that kind of delineates and the screen reader will read it as bold. It will let someone know that the text is bold. Italics doesn't really do a whole lot. and that's not really a good thing to use, but bold is okay. Just know that when it does that, it's going to it will read that it is in bold.
Okay, and if you created the table itself in
Mhm.
Word or Excel, and you checked the accessibility in Word and Excel, and now I copy it into PowerPoint, will it still be accessible?
You would have to run the accessibility checker to make sure.
Okay.
So, what you can see here at the bottom in the notes section are all of the things that were wrong with this slide when we began. It was missing alt text, there was low contrast on the subtitle, and there was no placeholder. This one had a duplicate title. There was click here. Here's that text. It's meaningless. So it should be to learn more about student success programs. So if I copy this, and then I go here, right click. I can edit the link. I don't even have to remove anything. I can copy and put the paste in the correct and then change it. And now you can see that it has the important information. So again, it's just an idea. This is a bear, so this would also need to be changed. The second one, this link here, would need to be edited. You can't have a raw URL. And from here, and now you can see that this reads very differently to someone who was hearing it with a screen reader. So again, this one had missing alt text. This one had the low contrast for the subheading, this program description. As you can see, it needs to be at least 59595959, which is a dark gray. Um, and I spend way too much time in hex codes to know that that's what that was. And so now I fixed that. It's almost black. All caps body text. So if I want to change this to I can change it if I go back to home and I go to the uh nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Oh, here it is. Change case. You're gonna go to sentence case and then you're gonna fix it. You don't have to retype it, you just need to fix it. Also, that this font right here and bulleted lists need to be bulleted lists. So they must use the bullet tool. And now we can make this bigger. I'm going to go ahead and make that 18. That's too small as well. And then we can go to the table. We've already fixed the table. We fixed the chart. Again, there's a whole bunch of shapes here that we had to mark as decorative in order for us to make sure that they are exactly what they're supposed to be. So, and then the last one, there were lots of things wrong with this. It's zero title, low contrast, click here, no QR code, no alt text. So there were lots of things wrong with that. But if we go back now and we check and we've gotten all the things and we fixed them. So now if you have to save this as a PDF, this is the last piece of the workshop today. What you're going to do is the following. I made all of the changes. Now I'm going to go, do not use save as Adobe PDF. You're going to go to save as. You can browse. This is the easiest way to do this. The first thing you're going to check is make sure that there is a title in that box. If there is no title in that box, your PDF will not be accessible, nor will your PowerPoint. So that's the first thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the file type to a PDF. I'll open the options just to make sure that this last box is checked. Document structure tags for accessibility, click. And now I can click save. And now my PowerPoint is going to be saved as an accessible PDF. So, um,
I do have an interesting question
mhm.
that Janet asks. In genetics, it matters lowercase and uppercase letters so that uppercase T, or uppercase T, lowercase t, so all
Yep,
permeabilities,
yep, yep, yep,
they have different meanings in biology.
yep.
So when she has it in her PowerPoint, how will the screen reader and really the blind student know which TT she's referring to?
If she uses capitals, then it will read capital T, capital T. It knows because it's not a word. We're only talking about no all caps for words, not for things like genetics and other things like that. The screen reader is going to understand that if it is an acronym or something like an acronym, then it will read out the capital letters one at a time. I'm pretty sure it, and I'm positive it reads lowercase and uppercase if as in if you were doing I'm trying to think of an example. Something that has like a lowercase o in the middle of a all caps. Um, I can't
Oh,
think of,
like Department of Justice, capital D, little o, capital J.
yes, it would read the small o. It would say lowercase o. Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Yep.
And
So
then can you just quickly do the saving as the accessible PDF one more time? Go through the steps.
actually, since we are at
Oh,
11:58, I'm not going to, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the accessibility guide that I created so that you can have that. So just give me
that
one
will work.
second.
Thank you.
And let me get the share link because this information is in here and I don't, and it's probably easier to read, everyone. All right, that link will take you to a document, and in that document are all of the things that I went over today, um, as well as if you scroll all the way down to the very end, um, it talks about creating a PDF, making your PDF accessible. It's number 12. So, and that will tell you exactly how to do that. You are going to make sure that you don't need anything checked except for document structure tags for accessibility. That's the only thing you need, and I just deleted the rest of it. And you're going to export as a PDF, and then you can make sure that it is done. So that's going to be, and then if you want to, there are some AI prompts that help with alt text, descriptive slide titles, and converting smart art to accessible text. So if you have smart art in your PowerPoints, you are going to want to make sure that they have accessible text as well. Now, the last thing I'm going to give you, this is a copy of the presentation slides. That is a live link. So it is, and if you need it as a downloadable file, you'll have to email Sherry. Um, but the slides are really not that important. It's really the document that is important. And the last piece is also if you want information on anything else that is accessible, that is the VCCS accessibility website where you can find all things accessible as well as access to all documents in a Google folder and online resources as well. And it is now 12 o'clock and I am not about trying to keep people over. My email is also in the PowerPoint, or if it isn't, it will be. And that's all I have for today.
Open Lab starts in about
5 minutes.
3 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much for joining us today. I also put in the link to the upcoming webinars by both Paige and Serby. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.